Former Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton's promise to revive the economy and to make the country work again won him the 1992 election with less than 50% of the vote. Clinton was helped by the presence of a popular third-party candidate, Ross Perot, a self-made Texas millionaire who won more than 20 million votes with a promise to balance the federal budget and end the massive federal deficit. Many believe Perot's strong showing cost Bush the election. Clinton was a self-proclaimed New Democrat. While he supported traditional Democratic ideas like government stimulation of the economy and big programs like national health care, he also favored some of the more traditional Republican views on issues of law and order, individual initiative, and welfare reform.
He decided that a strategy was necessary if the Democratic Party was to remain a majority party. And so he engaged in a process of splitting the differences between Democratic positions and Republican positions.
President Clinton promised to make affordable health insurance available to every working American. One of his first acts as president was to appoint his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, as head of his task force on health care reform. The program Mrs. Clinton presented would have been one of the largest government social programs since Social Security. Republicans objected, saying that big government wasn't the solution to the health care crisis. Many worried that national health insurance would deny Americans the right to pick their own doctor. As a result, the president's health care bill suffered a humiliating defeat. Backlash from the health care bill, as well as a big tax hike signed by the president in an effort to help balance the budget, resulted in a 1994 Republican landslide that swept both houses of Congress for the first time in 42 years. Conservative Republicans, led by Georgia Congressman Newt Gingrich, attacked Clinton's policies by drafting what they called a contract with America, promising to revive the kind of government President Reagan had championed. When President Clinton vetoed the Republican budget in late 1995, the two sides were at a stalemate, as Republicans refused to pass any temporary spending bills to keep the government running. As a result, many departments in the federal government were forced to shut down. Both sides blamed the other, but it was President Clinton who won the public relations battle when a majority of Americans blamed the Republican Congress for the impasse. This marked a bitter defeat for the Republicans' contract with America. A good example of President Clinton's New Democrat philosophy was his welfare reform bill. In 1996, Clinton signed a largely Republican bill that placed new restrictions on aid for dependent children, food stamps, and Medicaid. The new bill also put time limits on how long most people could receive welfare, as well as incentives to get them off of welfare and into the workforce.
Today, President Clinton is signing the Dole welfare bill. I'm glad he finally got around it. He vetoed it twice.
Ending the current welfare system had been a part of the Republican agenda for years, and fulfilling his campaign pledge to end welfare as we know it angered many of Clinton's Democratic constituents. After the '92 election, the U.S. economy began to turn around, and before the decade was over, the nation was in the midst of the longest economic expansion in American history. Many people also credited the work of Alan Greenspan, head of the Federal Reserve, who, through his skillful control of interest rates, kept inflation low while allowing the economy to continue to grow. In addition, American businesses invested heavily in new plants and equipment, which paid off in increased productivity. And for a while, the booming industry that grew up around the internet also helped the economy by providing new jobs and increased tax revenues. The favorable economic climate convinced more Americans than ever to own stocks, which, combined with the robust economy, produced an unprecedented boom in stock prices, particularly among the so-called dot-com companies. Despite his skill as a politician and the fact that he was re-elected in 1996, President Clinton had to weather a series of personal scandals during his time in office. The most serious involved his inappropriate involvement with a White House intern. He denied the relationship, but later was forced to admit that he had not been truthful. Bill Clinton became the first president in 131 years to be impeached by the House of Representatives and tried by the Senate. Ironically, Clinton's job approval ratings were higher than ever during the impeachment process. Public trust in Clinton himself, however, as well as in the presidential office in general, dropped dramatically. Nevertheless, the Senate acquitted Clinton on February 12, 1999, and he completed his second term. President Clinton presided over the strongest U.S. economy in 30 years. The combination of the two tax hikes by Presidents Bush and Clinton and a booming economy combined to produce 4 budget surpluses in a row, as well as a dramatic reduction in the federal deficit. But the economy took a downturn at the end of Clinton's presidency when the dot-com bubble burst and technology stocks tumbled from their high prices. In addition, President Clinton also changed the tone of the Democratic Party, creating a coalition of new Democrats that kept traditional Democratic commitments to social welfare while adopting more conservative fiscal measures. In Yugoslavia, the winds of change brought chaos. Under communism, Yugoslavia had been made up of separate republics, including Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Once centralized authority was gone, old rivalries flared up and a bloody and bitter civil war erupted. The war in Bosnia quickly degenerated into a brutal terrorist campaign called ethnic cleansing, in which Serbs forced thousands of Bosnian Muslims into detention camps and killed thousands more. In 1998, Serbs and Muslims negotiated a peace accord under the supervision of the United States, but fighting in the region had been so brutal that the UN established a war crimes tribunal to address atrocities committed during the war, including charges against former Yugoslavian President Slobodan Milosevic of murder, torture, and other crimes against humanity. What happened in the old Yugoslavia was just one example of how the Western powers struggled to find an effective way of dealing with international crises once the Cold War came to a sudden end. Even the United States, in effect the winner of the Cold War, found it difficult to adjust. The common enemy of Soviet communism, which had for so long provided the U.S. with a clear-cut objective in terms of foreign policy, was gone. The quick end to the Cold War left the United States as the world's one superpower. And as the 21st century dawned, America struggled to redefine itself in its dealings with the rest of the world.
They have had the White House so long that they've run out of energy, run out of ideas, run out of direction, and they ought to be run out of town, and with your help we can.
Bill Clinton was the first rock and roll president. The saxophone-playing governor from Arkansas had run a youthful campaign. He revealed on MTV what type of underwear he favored while outrunning whispered allegations of extramarital affairs.
I was Bill Clinton's lover for 12 years.
There is a school of thought that Bill Clinton really wanted to be a rock star, but he'd settle for being president of the United States if he could live like a rock star.
Number 42, Bill Clinton, Democrat, 1993 to 2001. 46 years old, from Arkansas. Bill Clinton's election fulfilled a lifelong ambition for a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks who was determined to become president. As a politician, he was a natural.
Clinton was the most seductive and charming person I've ever seen in national politics. He could be in a room of 100 people and make each person he talked to feel like he was directly boring into that person's soul.
He's famous for his handshake, which is not just a handshake. He grabs your hand and then his other hand moves up your arm, and pretty soon he's enfolded you in a giant embrace. He was just kind of all-embracing bear of a man.
Clinton was a Yale Law School graduate and a Rhodes Scholar. His empathy, captured in the catchphrase, "I feel your pain," was legendary. So was his appetite for junk food.
How is that?
I haven't eaten it yet. I'm eating an apple fritter right now.
Bill Clinton's management style was chaotic. His White House was known for casual dress, crowded meetings, and all-night bull sessions.
He is so interested in different viewpoints that he could have 60 people in a room and be willing to listen to every one of them because he might just find a different clue as to something he hadn't thought about.
One viewpoint Clinton clearly valued was his first ladies. Hillary Clinton was the first presidential spouse to have an office in the West Wing, and to some members of the staff, it seemed like there were two presidents.
You could take an issue to the president, and if he said no, you could appeal to the First Lady, and maybe she would say yes, and then maybe you could get her to get him to change his mind.
Neither are those people.
Clinton's first 2 years in office saw the failure of the administration's health care reform initiative and the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Thanks in part to the vehemence of Clinton's political enemies, the young presidency was already being defined by the types of investigations and scandals that would eventually consume it. Travelgate, Whitewater, and the filing of a sexual harassment lawsuit against the president by Paula Jones. In the 1994 midterm elections, a resurgent Republican Party gained control of both houses of Congress for the first time in 40 years.
He was clearly depressed by the loss that had taken place.
Everybody figured he was finished. They underestimated what a good politician Bill Clinton is.
Clinton made a move towards the political center, using public opinion polls as his guidepost. But he was challenged at every step by his newly minted nemesis, Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.
In some ways, Newt Gingrich was a great gift to Bill Clinton, much as the malefactors of great wealth were to Teddy Roosevelt or Douglas MacArthur was to Harry Truman.
It was in the budget negotiations late in 1995 that the battle between Clinton and Gingrich came to a head. With the threat of a government shutdown looming, Gingrich tried to force Clinton into making concessions on Medicare and education spending. But the president refused to compromise.
At that point, I said to myself, the president gets it, because in politics, you really do have to draw a line. And at that point, he understood that he had to draw a line. And I think it was a turning point in the presidency.
Clinton's risk paid off. He was able to paint Gingrich and the Republicans as the cause of the government shutdown, forcing them to an eventual budget compromise. It was a great political victory. But during the shutdown, most of the paid White House staff was sent home, which allowed an unpaid intern named Monica Lewinsky to get unusually close to the president. With his convincing re-election in 1996, Clinton's political comeback was complete. Taking advantage of the booming American economy, he was now able to steer Congress to balance the federal budget for the first time since Andrew Jackson's presidency. Then the bubble burst. In August 1998, Clinton's Oval Office affair with Monica Lewinsky became public when the former intern was called to testify in the Paula Jones sexual harassment case.
That was the beginning of Lewinsky-gate and the scandal that just totally consumed Bill Clinton's presidency.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
When you make a mistake, you got to fess up and do it fast. If he had said, I made a mistake with this young woman, I'm sorry, it would have been controversial, been hard. But I think the country would have rallied to him, and we could have been spared the impeachment process.
Instead, on December 19, 1998, Bill Clinton became only the second president in history to be impeached. As had happened with Andrew Johnson 130 years earlier, the momentum of the impeachment process sputtered when it came time to vote him out of office. Neither the American public nor the United States Senate found Clinton's lying about his sex life to be an adequate reason for his removal.
I think 100 years from now, historians are still going to be scratching their heads on the question of the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Was it an impeachable offense? Well, it was impeachable only because it was caught up in this strange and bitter politics that really defined the 1990s.
It was a dangerous sideshow because while we were all concentrating on Bill Clinton's sexual peccadillos, Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Afghanistan was preparing a plot that was going to kill 3,000 Americans.
Having survived impeachment, Clinton did what he could to salvage the remainder of his presidency. He lent American military might to a NATO effort that halted an ethnic cleansing campaign in Kosovo. And he made a bold but unsuccessful effort to revive the faltering peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. By the time he left office, Bill Clinton had presided over the longest economic expansion in American history, yet his legacy will always be clouded by his impeachment.
You're not going to have kids queuing up in Little Rock at his presidential library to see the NAFTA pen under glass. People look for drama in history, and the great drama of the Clinton years, unfortunately, was his impeachment problem and the Lewinsky scandal, and that's what he has to live with.
During the 1994 baseball strike, President Bill Clinton ordered representatives of the players and owners to meet and resolve the strike. Both sides ignored the presidential order.
I'm getting sick and tired. I am every single night hearing one of these carping little liberal Democrats jumping all over my you know what. And I can't wait.
One of the great achievements of the conservative movement of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was to make the word liberal a dirty word. Collectively, conservatives saw liberal as synonymous with lack of self-restraint. The most extreme aspects of the countercultural movement become associated with liberalism.
Instead of saying a liberal is someone who believes in equal rights, equal opportunities, believes in Social Security, believes in health care, they ended up trying to hide and say, well, I'm not a liberal, I'm just a moderate. And I think what that did was to allow the conservatives to define liberalism.
By occupying what had come to be the new center, Democrats believed they could appeal to a wider range of voters. They were led in this effort by William Jefferson Clinton, an upstart young governor from Arkansas who combined the telegenic media savvy of Reagan, the soulfulness of a bleeding heart liberal, and the politics of both.
Democratic Leadership Council, of which Clinton was of course a critical part in the late 80s and the early 90s, tried to come up to articulate and to lay out new Democratic Party positions on a number of issues. We're going to get tough on crime, for example. We're going to be more cautious about spending. We're going to be more responsible stewards of the public's money, and we're not going to be those tax and spend Democrats the Republicans are always talking about.
We need jobs.
We sure do. I want you to vote for me because I'm the only fellow running that's had to create jobs.
Clinton was a masterful campaigner, and he got better and better at it, and he understood that although these other conservative issues were important, that right in that critical 92 window there, that the economy was what was important, and people were concerned about jobs. All those factors together, Clinton's skills as a campaigner, Bush's weaknesses, I think, and the economy created the kind of, if not a perfect storm, something like it in 92.
Early in his first administration, Clinton made several attempts at instituting liberal policies that ended in failure. His don't ask, don't tell approach to gays in the military pleased no one, while his health care reform package was resoundingly defeated by Congress.
This was a real body blow to Clinton because he had staked his early career political presidency on getting that health care program through. And by the end of the time, it was a failure in just about every way. At the same time,
this is a total mess, and it's about to get messier.
It gave the Republicans an issue to argue that Bill Clinton was the same old tax and spend. Democrats, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Sweeping victories in the 1994 midterm elections gave Republicans control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, effectively tying Clinton's hands.
Just as 92 may have been a perfect storm in terms of electing Clinton, 94 was a perfect storm for the Republicans because they had a skilled practitioner of the slash and burn politics in Newt Gingrich. The rhetoric that increasingly, I think, dominates American political life really is refined to an extraordinary degree in that campaign. And it was Gingrich himself who handed out a series of words to be used whenever describing Democrats: degenerate, tax and spend. And in the 1994 campaign, it worked.
Often accused of governing by public polls, Clinton responded to the shift in public opinion by trimming his own political sails. In 1996, he signed the Welfare Reform Act, legislation bitterly opposed by liberal Democrats. Despite Clinton's political centrism, he inspired deep resentment and rage in Republican conservatives, who deemed him dishonest and untrustworthy. Midway through his second term, their accusations and investigations finally caught up with him when he was trapped in a lie about his relationship with a young White House intern.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
Mr. Burns, guilty.
Bill Clinton was impeached primarily because of the polarization of American politics in the 1990s, I think. Many Republicans simply did not regard him as a legitimate president. That's the first factor. The second factor is Bill Clinton was impeached because he did a number of very stupid things. But there's a third factor, I think, and that is the inability and the failure of the media to penetrate and to put these issues in context. Even though when it was finally all over and done with, the American people weren't convinced.
Clinton's popularity ratings remained high throughout the impeachment.
This can be, and this must be, a time of reconciliation.
In the end, Clinton remained in office, but his effectiveness as president had been deeply compromised and his personal reputation badly tarnished. Clinton's failures frequently overshadowed his accomplishments, but he did succeed where others before him had failed.
Whether through luck, he was partly lucky, but through his own skills and his own commitment, he brought the American political fiscal house into order. The United States, which had been facing escalating deficits through the Reagan years, by the end of the Clinton years, was running surpluses, something that's almost unheard of in our modern history here. And that was an enormous accomplishment because it created the kind of economic framework in which we had one of the longest, most sustained periods of economic growth that we've had since the 1960s.